We've now done the settings page, and next up is this actions page. I've designed this in Affinity Designer. There's quite a few of you asking how we do these kind of mock-ups, so I'll probably cover that as well in a future video. But for now, what I'm going to do is first just export this background, so I'll at least show you how to export the SVG background, and then we'll get on to coding this tabbed view here, because every single part of this action page will have a print job, a custom property job, a file info. All these options will have different UIs. But the top level container inside of actions will be this tab view here. So let's just take a look. So in Affinity Designer, if we want this background, the way I've designed it, I've just got a group here with the different pages. So you can kind of hide and show different pages. And the important part is, if we go into, say, the header here, you can see that's the header. And this is the background I want, this header background. So all I'm going to do is copy this and make a new document. But considering we already have the background settings SVG here, I'm just going to open that, paste in the new background, align it to the top left, and scale it to match. That saves us having different scales of backgrounds because I've already made one. We'll delete the old settings one. And the limitation of Affinity Designer at the minute is you can do things like effects, which is similar to the Photoshop styles. And if we put a gradient on here and then exported this gradient as an SVG, you wouldn't get the color. So what you have to do is, SVGs can't have effects layers. Instead, what I've done is on each of the icons, I've used the color up here, and instead of being a solid color, I've selected a gradient and added the gradient here. And then I've just made the gradient as well 50% opacity in this window here, or 25% opacity. So now if we export that with File Save As, we can select an SVG, select to rasterize nothing, and importantly also select to flatten transforms, otherwise it can scale strange. Then if we export that, I've already tested that it works here, and then if we go to the file and open it in the browser, you can see you've got the colors, so we know it's worked. I'll cover a full tutorial on how to use Affinity Designer, I guess, because people are quite interested in this. But for now, this is what we want to do. We want to get this kind of tab view looking similar to this. And obviously, we've got to make the action page header. It's going to be similar to the settings page header. So we want to take this kind of header part here. So we'll scroll up, find the header here. And also we have a view model. So let's just double check. We've at least got the view model bound. No, we've got nothing. So we'll just take the view model, the grid, the header, and then we'll close off the grid in our one, and I think, yeah, that'll be it. So go to here, get rid of the action, close the grid off, change this now to action page view model, and we also need the view model namespace there. There we go, action page view model. We then bring in the preview. You can see we've got the preview here. We don't have the background color set, and that's because we also set them here. And we also want the designer size, so we could have just copied all of that really. And we also want to set the data type, so we should have just copied everything really. And the data type is the action page view model. We're now set up. We have the background. We have this where we can change to actions. And we just got to include it because I didn't include it in here. It was in an assets folder. So right click on images, add existing, go up to the top, into the resources, add the actions and copy it over. Set it to an Avalonia resource. And then if we compile, that should now show the actions background, which it hasn't. We've now got rectangles, so let's see what's gone on there. Preview's okay there. And you can see there's quite a big difference here. It's literally done rectangles and clipping paths for some reason. So let's just go back to this and open it up. These are still text files, so see this A here? That means it's still a text. You want to put text as curves. There we go, export text as curves. We do that, go back to Avalonia, delete the one and re-add it. You can see now this is much shorter. Change that to an Avalonia resource. Compile, and hopefully now it's working. There we go. Change setting to actions. Copy this text. Delete the middle part. Then if we run this, we should now have the blank actions page with the header. If we navigate to actions, does that look the right size? Yeah, that's the right size. Just looks strange because the width isn't showing as many of the icons as this preview, but that's just because of resizing. This can obviously change. We grab and resize this, if I can actually get a hold of it. Oh no, actually it doesn't. The height of this is smaller than our preview here. So we might want to change the height to be sort of larger, but I guess we did that in hindsight of fitting more things in. So what we could do is restyle our SVG by updating this height to be slimmer. But for now, that's fine. That header's okay. We'll move on to doing the tab view. If we take a look on Avalonia's documentation, you can see we have a tab control. And this is what we're after, definitely. So we want a tab control with tab items inside. And then what we'll do inside of here is bind to content presenters or content controls. And we'll bind those to view models, which go through the view locator to pull in specific views potentially. Or we could just bake everything straight into here and bind to one view model. It really doesn't matter which. And likely, for the point of simplicity, we'll split all of the view models into separate view models. So we'll have, in here we've got the actions page view model. We might now have sub view models in here, or just subclasses, and check if the view model binding ends up working. So let's just code it all in one for now, I think, and then we can always split it down into classes after. It's always the same principle. Don't overcomplicate things at first, just dump everything in and clean up later. So the first step is, after the stack panel, we have the column definitions here, 2 columns and 2 rows. And that was copied from the settings page, whereas in the actions page, we want 1 row here for the action. So we've got this header here is 1 row, and this is just going to be the other row. And then inside is obviously just a single tab here. Everything else is outside of that. So that will mean we don't need 2 columns. We do that, get rid of the column span of 2. And now in here, we can put a tab control, grid.row1, and I'm inside of the wrong grid there. There we go. And let's just copy and paste this into here. And we can see there's the tab. We're going to instantly need to style this, but we'll see if we have... Actually, yeah, we are. We're going to need to style it. So we might as well start with making a new style. Now the question will be, can we style it with purely styles? Or are we going to need to override the control and make our own template? Now almost always the answer ends up boiling back to making our own control, because there's very few things of advanced controls we seem to be able to style how we like. So I'm just going to go straight in and presume that. Make a new resource dictionary, call it tab control, and in this case we're doing the same as the checkbox. We're just overriding the entire control, just like this. So we have a resource dictionary, we make a previewer up, and all we're going to do is copy the tab control from the Avalonia GitHub. So we just go to github.com/Avalonia UI/Avalonia. In here we can see the source code. Then we are using the Fluent template. We will have controls, and now we'll have tab control. And then we copy this. So we just view raw. This is pretty much what we're copying. So we can copy the whole thing, paste it all in here, show preview, and there is the predefined template. This is what we're now going to edit. The goal is to look similar to this, so all it really is is a nice little soft outline and curved tabs at the top with a bar underneath and white text. The highlighted tab, I didn't know whether to go with this kind of faded background that we have, like on the home here when you hover, so the hover background, or whether we want the action colour here. You'll also notice, before we do this, one thing I didn't quite cover was I didn't like the vibrant cyan colour of the buttons. So if we just go to the settings page, you might have noticed I've toned down these colours of the outline button, the normal button, and the selections here. And I probably should make that white instead of black now on the selection. But I just thought those buttons were a bit too highlighty. So now they're a lot more subtle. We still got the nice bright hover effects, but once they're left alone, the UI is a lot more subtle and not in your face. For that, it's probably easier to just look at the commit in GitHub of what changed. So in the app here, we added a primary foreground subtle brush. We added the active gradient, which makes the text here on these buttons slightly brighter. And I changed the active gradient, which was cyan, to this new colour, as well as changing the active hover gradient to be slightly duller or slightly brighter. So those are all in here now, and you can see this active gradient text is new with this colour. The active gradient was cyan, it's now this nice purple. The active gradient hover has now matched as well to match the kind of purple colour. And I added a primary foreground subtle here so that when we've got the buttons, they slightly increase in brightness. So the text isn't quite white when you're not hovering, and when you hover it goes to an almost white. If I just commit these now, so if we ignore the background actions that we've just worked on, and this Avalonia hint file doesn't matter, the app's got them in, background actions doesn't matter, neither does that, neither does the tab control we're working on, and then I updated the buttons to use these new values for the colours. So what I'll do is commit just the button and the app style and call this new less in your face buttons. Before we commit that, let's just fix as well the tab view I mentioned, the selection on this, not tab view, sorry, the list box. So that will be likely a list box item in the selected state. So we've got a selected state, the foreground colour wants to be, in this case now, the primary foreground. There we go, so that fixes that one. And if we recompile, it now works there as well. So I'll commit these changes as a single push here. So we do commit, and then I'll just push that up. And if you guys want to follow along then with this, if you go to github.com/angel6/YouTube, you can click this button here, and you can open with desktop, or you can download a zip. I download GitHub Desktop and then open it with this, and you can pull all of this code. The one we're interested in is the Avalonia batch process folder, and then this is our code that we're working on, and this gets pushed every video. If we went to the top level, so click the YouTube button, and go to 102 commits, you can see then all the commits we do. If you wanted to see what we've just pushed and just those changes, you've got a nice view here of what you need to change in code to make yours match. So you can flick through, you can see there on the list box item, we changed foreground from primary background to primary foreground. In the buttons file, we changed the foreground from primary background to primary foreground subtle, and so on. So that's a good way to follow along. Now we've done that, let's just get back to the tab control. As in all of the controls, you see in the preview we had the dynamic background gradient and a width. So we'll kind of copy this. And we might even just do the border as well. This is just a nice way of visualizing each control. So we have a border already, but we'll override ours with that. That now looks like the main part of our app, and we get a bit more correct context. So let's just take a look and familiarize ourselves with how this is actually working. And we can see in the template of this, not much is really happening at all. We have the template control, and inside it's got a dock panel. So we've got two things. We've got the items presenter and we've got the content presenter. This has items panel and this has selected content. So this will be the top and the bottom. Now, we can see from here, we make a tab item inside of tab control. So all this code will happen not in the template, but in the code behind of the control. But we do know, and we can see from here, it's the tab item that we want to style for the top here. So if we go back to the controls and get a tab item, we'll do the same on this, get the raw, copy all this, go back to here, make a new resource dictionary, call it tab item, paste in, select here. Now we can see the tabs. We'll go to the top, get the same border outline again, replace that border with this one, and that's now what we're looking at. And we've obviously got to go from this vertical to a horizontal presentation, and it also looks nothing like this at all at the minute. So we need to figure out what's making this look like this. So doing some digging around, we can see the selected one is throwing us off. If we remove the as selected, you can see we just get black text under here. And the yellow background's because it's literally been set here as the preview. So taking them into account, you can see it's just black text here. And if we were to set a background, it would go yellow. But the main difference is they're going across at the minute. And why would that be? The hints here, if we look at the selector, we can see it selects into the items presenter, which is the one for inside of the tab control, and then it presumes a wrap panel. If we look into the actual Avalonia controls folder this time in tab control, and we scroll through, you can see the default panel is set to wrap panel. So if we don't override it, it's going to be a wrap panel. Now in the previewer of the tab items, they're inside of a stack panel. So let's just change that to a wrap panel, remove the spacing. Let's remove the as selected for a minute. And you can see now that clearly is that, with the exception of this underline for selection. We've got to figure out where that comes from. And the background is obviously what it is. So we can be fairly certain that if we style this tab item now, how we like, we'll have something similar. But the last thing before we start is we need to figure out where this underline is coming from. We know if we remove the content presenter, for example, you can see we still have the selection. So it's within the items presenter, and the items presenter just has a dock setting here, which we can remove. That doesn't change anything. That's just where this is docked within this dock panel. And the items panel just binds to the items panel of the control, which we can see here. It gets set to the default panel. So it's just a wrap panel. So this is doing no more than setting just the wrap panel at the minute. And yet we're having this underline inside of the wrap panel. Now the only place I can even see a hint at where to find this underline is if we look in the actual tab control class file, so the CS class file. It mentions here a tab control that displays a tab strip, not a tab item, a tab strip. So I'm presuming, without digging too deep into all this code and figuring it out, it doesn't use a tab item as such. So it will use a tab item, but I think it's a tab strip item. So you can see if we search for tab item, it all mentions tab strip, and if it is of class tab item. But if we go to the controls, you can see there's a tab item, and there is no tab strip. So there isn't a class for a tab strip anywhere. It's just classed as a tab item. But if we go to the styles, so we go to the Fluent styles, and the controls, and we type tab strip, there's not only a tab control and a tab item, but a tab strip item. If we select the raw of this instead of the tab item, go into the tab item here, select all and override, look at what we get. We get the much more visual of what we're seeing. So I haven't figured out where specifically this tab strip item gets injected, but I don't think that matters for now. We don't want to dig too deep if all we're trying to do is style, but that's clearly what it is. And again, all we have to do is copy the border first, replace this border so it looks more similar, and then we'll want this to be inside of a wrap panel like before, because that's what the control typically does. And there we go, we now have the styles we want. So let's just rename this to a tab strip item. And we have tab control and tab strip item. And let's not forget to add it here, or they won't get used in the app. And let's see if we can now style what we want from these two classes. So this should be fairly simple. If we take a look what we have, again, it's not that complicated. There's a border, which if you're ever trying to figure out what it is, just change things like this to red, and it'll show what it is. So that border is the overall wrapping border, which I don't think we need to do anything with. Then we have a panel, and inside the panel we have content presenter, so you can either delete that and see what happens. You can see the content inside goes. This border, let's change this to red again, and there you go. So this border, selected pipe, is the underline we want, and this content is the actual content presenter, which I guess can be anything. And if we look at what we do inside of a tab item, we've set a text block. So we're the reason why there's a big giant text block here. We've actually made this, whereas this could be anything. I guess in our case, we might as well leave it flexible enough to have anything inside. And what we want to do then is this content presenter wants to be wrapped in a kind of border, which might be all we need. So let's just do a border, put the content presenter inside, and then let's just have a border brush of dynamic resource, and I think we want the hover gradient maybe. Border thickness is 3 for now and again until we put that in a property somewhere. There we go, we have a border. We definitely don't want the hover gradient. We want a nice, subtle, thin line. So we will want the primary hover background, maybe. Nope, too dark. Or is it? Oh no, it is actually really dark what we've set. But that definitely doesn't want to be 3. Probably wants to be 1, maybe even 2. Let's try 2. The corner radius is top left 10, top right 10, and the bottom's 0. Something like that. Now, between them, I don't think we want any. Let's just do a background a minute. Yeah, so we can see where they are. We want to maybe remove margin, maybe remove padding. No, neither of them. So we have a gap between each item in the panel. It's on the actual tab strip item itself, padding here, which is set to tab item margin. We want that to be 0. There we go, so now we've got no gap. Let's just remove that red. We don't want that anymore. We want the foreground colour on here to be primary foreground. We actually want some padding inside, which is 0 at the minute. We'll do, nope, not padding inside that. Keep that at 0. Padding on this. Yep, there we go, that's nice. And bear in mind we just have, they've actually put tab strip out, yeah, just text straight inside, which is converted to this. The underline we want to change to being the background colour, so let's see what's happening. We just have tab item header selected pipe fill. So I'm guessing this is getting changed maybe. Is visible false. So they just tagged it with the part name. And then the code is hiding or showing this element. So what we want is, we want this exact border again with a background. So this panel is going to have to change to a grid, because what we want to do is then copy this exact thing to here. Just thinking this through in my head. We want to name this one that, so it hides and shows on selected. We don't care about any of them. Is visible false, we should check as false initially. So now I think that should overlay the control, and we can just set up a background. There we go, and then we move that to before maybe. Is enough. Border grid, so above border. There we go. So set it there. Set this now to a dynamic resource of. This might be tricky actually, because the colour is going to have to stay the same for this to work easily. So Never remember the name of these still. Default gradient. I think it's just default gradient maybe. Or primary hover background. There, and is visible. Then is visible to false, and the code should override it. So there we go. We now have the selected color. So this looks like this, and we just got to update the text and make things bold. So the background, yeah, so that background is not, we don't want that to have the template background at all. Or do we? Yeah, we do, but what we want is the corner radius to actually be on here. Oh, it's already below. There. So they can't override the corner radius in styling now, but they can set the background. We also want the border thickness to match our 2. Or do we? No, we don't. That wants to be 0. In fact, might as well leave that in then. So we have the, I don't even know whether we want any kind of hover effect. Just the background really, because the content inside we shouldn't really care about. We should leave that up to whatever content is inside. So I think when it's selected, we're changing the foreground and background. So we could use the actual selected state here. Oh yeah, so that's all it's done anyway. It's just done in the style to hide and show that background. So what we could do, we don't need this extra part at all. We can just literally get rid of that. And then on selected, just change the background color. And then we can also bind the background here. So that's literally all we need to do. So when we have selected, selected pipe isn't needed, so that can go. And the background here wants to be the default gradient, was it? There we go. That's all we need. And this wants to be primary foreground. And now on hover, I think on hover we'd want, see now we might want selected to be a bit more visible. I think maybe this on the, or rather active gradient when it's selected. Let's have a go at this. So we have the active gradient when it's selected. Same with the border brush really. Which is apparently not working. Let's get rid of all these others. Selected over, pressed. Don't think we want any of them. Selected, pressed. Now it's just, why is the border brush not working? This border brush is bound to here, and this wants to be bound to, I guess, the template binding border brush. And now we can set the default border brush. To the primary hover. So there we go. So now we have the default style of the border brush, but we can also override it on styles. Pointer over, let's just delete for now. So there we go. So we do want a pointer over. We don't want to sub-select anything. We don't want to change the foreground. We just want to change the background now. So I think the background on here wants to be the default gradient. There we go. It's looking nice. But the active one, I don't think we want it on, which means we want the selected style to come after the hover style. There we go. Okay, nice. And this background color here is going to override the hover background color, which I'm okay with for now, because otherwise the hover doesn't really make sense. And then disabled, we want to change the background. So the thing is, we don't have a disabled one in this visual. We go to here, get rid of that. Is enabled, is it? Disabled. So there's a disabled item. And we want for that, the background to probably be the default gradient, while the foreground could be the primary background. That's normally what we do on a disabled to make it look disabled. And I think that looks alright. So if we now go to tab control, does this now update? Oh, of course not. Does it update in here? Do we actually? Oh, you can't click them yet. We've got to update the code to allow us to navigate that way through the UI, which we can do at some point. Let's just see in here. Nope, so it's not taking on this style now. So let's just try renaming this back to tab item then, because the tab strip obviously can't be it, even though the style looks like it. So we want to keep the style, but if we have now rename that back to tab item, what happens if we just change this tab item? So what if we just change, and I think all we really got to do is change this, to be honest, to tab item. And change these from tab strip items to tab items. So now they look the same again, but does this use the tab item? So nothing's updating this view. Even if we use a tab item, it's not updating, so I'm not sure what's going on here. Let's just see if it updates here, and it actually crashes here. So why? Control text block already has a visual content presenter, so yeah, it doesn't like being overridden in this way. So the only other thing is this isn't quite the same as the original preview when we changed it to between tab item and tab strip item. Let's maybe just paste them back in, copy that over, and change this one to disabled. I don't know if that's going to have any effect, and now it's a header, which obviously this isn't a header. I've got a feeling we're going the wrong way here because it wouldn't. There is no underline style. But still, let's just plod through a little bit. You can see the content presenter is set to header. And the content presenter on here is set to content. So we set that to header. We now have that. But the fact is, it's still not showing here in the previewer. Oh, now it does. Huh. Interesting. Let's see if this now works. So the question would be, why is the tab item preview? Yeah, now it's showing. Now we've got to obviously fix this style. It's way too big and things, but why did the default tab item, which is here, if we copy and paste that over, look like this with no, like this? Effectively, this is the problem here. This selected is big there. And in the template, oh yeah, it did have a selected pipe, but just doesn't show right. So I never really spotted that in the template, but this threw us off. This kind of selected being way too high is what threw us off. But overriding this, it's worked anyway. That was a long-winded way around figuring out just how to style that. We were in the right place in the first time, just doing tab item, and we were simply just thrown off by the active being looking wrong and then spotting a tab strip item, which led us down styling the other control. So now the text is massive. Why is the text massive? Font size is set here. Let's delete that. There we go. And the min high, probably delete that. There we go. Padding on these items now, probably could have more padding. Where is the padding? There. Top and bottom 5. Left and right 15, yeah, maybe. Let's see what that looks like. They're much nicer. So now we just need to space this out because our tabs here are away from the edges. And I kind of wanted maybe a border, but I also didn't at the same time. This header at the minute just looks floating. Whereas it being butt up, I don't know. I don't like it being butt up against the edge, or maybe I do. But bring it down and in. Because once you bring it in, you've got this kind of floating edge with nothing on. But it doesn't look right tucked up either. Probably want the font to be bold when selected as well. So we're nearly there now. Let's go to the actions page. We have the tab control we've put in the second page of the header. So let's just do a border with a padding of 15. And let's just double check the other controls that we've got some consistency with this padding. There we go. Let's just double check settings page. And this padding here is much larger, but it comes from where? So we have the content, the header, spacing 15 there, margin 25. So we've got a 25 all round margin. And we did 25 here. See, now that should be even. So why is that not even, or is it? That definitely doesn't look even, but it is. So that's now 25 there and there, but it just looks like there's way more on the left. I guess in here now we can fill, oh yeah, let's just style that first. The selected tab wants the font weight to be bold. There we go, that's nicer. The content inside at the minute you can see is not correctly spaced, but we'll come to the content when we get to it. It doesn't really matter at the minute because we've just done the tab header. In the actions panel, all I'm going to do now is fill it with these. So print, custom properties, file info, modelize, just all the names. And that's all of them. Let's rerun this and see if it looks something like what we want. Go to actions. Yes, there we go. That's nice. Now the only thing I don't like is see that slight shift because the bold text is kind of shunting the size left and right. So that's definitely not a nice visual. But I'm not sure how we're going to solve that, to be honest. Let's just be sure that it has nothing to do with the font, or rather let's check it is to do with the font weight, which I'm sure it is, by just removing that for a minute. Yeah, so it's the font weight doing it. So to be honest, let's leave the font weight out for now then, because that's a much smoother experience than having the size of the shift left and right. So that's it for this one. We've now got a nice tab inside here, and next up we'll form the inside page here for print actions with all the settings related to an actual print job. And this should be fairly easy because all of these elements should already be styled, so it's just kind of laying out controls. And we'll have to make 2 new buttons here for sort of warning and OK, or like warning and success.